So, observations about fathers in birth.
Yes, I must explain first that I have the experience of childbirth in several kinds of environment. I started to be involved in childbirth as a medical student during the winter 1953-1954. And I'm still involved in childbirth because occasionally I'm still attending home birth. So during this period, more than half a century, I had first the experience of hospital birth without the participation of the father. We can say this was until 1970. Until 1970, nobody had ever thought that baby's father might be there. Childbirth had always been women's business. Then the doctrine of the father participating in the birth developed very quickly, incredibly fast. So between 1970 and 1985, I had only the experience of hospital birth with the participation of the father. After that, let's say, to simplify, between 1985 and 2000, I had only the experience of home birth with the participation of the father, because the doctrine was well established. I was going to home birth by myself. So although I was trying to keep a low profile, it was the couple giving birth, like it was like that at that time. And then, since the year 2000, I have only, mostly, let's say, the experience of home birth without the father. Because when I go to a home birth now, I go there with a doula, always the same doula. She's the mother of 4 children. She's a grandmother, a huge experience as a doula. My presence in the house makes the birth legal in the British context. But in fact, what I'm doing is just to make the man busy in the kitchen, talking with him, finding topics of conversation, and leaving the 2 women together. And what I can say from this experience, what I learned in this different sort of environment, that finally I'm more and more convinced that the most common reason by far for long and difficult birth is the presence of the father. That's probably the main issue. The reason why that was not been understood clearly, probably, when the new doctrine was established around in 1970, it started in the 1970 when some women occasionally wanted to keep the baby's father with them. It was a new demand, strange at the beginning. Nobody had ever thought of that. But something we could understand, because it was a sort of adaptation to childbirth in huge hospitals. Historically speaking, we cannot dissociate the participation of the father at birth and the concentration of birth in large hospitals. The participation of the father at birth is an aspect of the industrialization of childbirth. It didn't happen at the time of home birth a century ago. Nobody had ever, a century ago, when most women were giving birth at home, the father was somewhere in the house. He was usually boiling water, but giving birth was women's business. So we have to realize how this new doctrine emerged. It started from an occasional demand, understandable, also the time when the midwife disappeared, or the midwife became just one member of a medical team, also the time when the family became smaller, reduced to the nuclear family. So we understand how it happened that some women wanted to keep the baby with them. In a hospital, when we had this occasional demand, of course, we could observe some new scenarios. I say in a hospital, compared with other maternity units. In many maternity units, when a woman wanted to keep baby's father with her, they gave the father a wet coat and said, please stay here and wait. In our maternity unit, a place where women could be more spontaneous, were not obliged to be on a bed or on a table and so on. We started to observe new scenes. For example, when a woman was in hard labor, grasping the hair of her husband, the shirt of her husband, shaking the husband, like that. I said at that time, that's not the presence of the father. This is the participation of the father. But what personally I had not anticipated is how quickly theoreticians would establish new doctrines, new dogmas. Mm-hmm. What was an occasional demand became a dogma, a doctrine. They said, the father participating in the birth, that it should be like that, it's wonderful, that will create strong links inside the couples. So from now on, we can expect that the rate of divorces will decrease. And also, we heard from these theoreticians. I say theoretician because the new doctrine didn't come from people directly involved in childbirth. It didn't come from the midwives. No. We heard also, the father is a familiar person. So his presence will make the birth easier because he's a familiar person. So from now on, the rate of intervention, the rate of cesarean section and so on, the need for drugs will decrease. So that was the root of the dogma around 1970. Today, we can say for sure that it's not as simple as that. And we have to realize that people have not raised the right question around 1970. Of course, the first one is, does the participation of the father, does it make the birth easier or more difficult? Of course, it's not simple, it's not no clear-cut answer, many sort of men, many sort of couple. But one reason for difficulties to answer this question is that people didn't take into account that human beings have two languages. One is the verbal language. So from the time when the doctrine was established, all women were saying, I cannot imagine giving birth without my husband, without my partner. That was the standardized language, with words. But human beings also have a non-verbal language. And often this non-verbal language says exactly the opposite. And I have countless anecdotes and constantly new anecdotes which have many similarities. It's a labor going on slowly, slowly, slowly. And suddenly, for some reasons, often unexpected reason, the father is obliged to get out. And what happens? As soon as the man has gone, the woman in labor starts screaming, shouting, going to the loo. And 10 minutes later, baby is born. And a very, very common story. So with their body, women say exactly the opposite, or can say exactly the opposite of what they say with words. But often when there is such an anecdote, often, probably because the doctrine is strong, people don't establish a link, with the fact that the father had gone at that time.